Hello, everyone. Welcome back. We're so excited to see you. It's Ready, Set, Action. Today, you're joining Deborah Horowitz and myself, Christina Whitmer, and we have a special guest, Brett Barron with Dialogues, a web company that's located in North Texas. So, today, we're going to discuss 3 tips on choosing the right web development partner. So, hi, Dee. Hi, Brett.
Good afternoon.
Hi, Christina. Hi,
Hi.
Brett. We are, and hi to everybody that's listening and attending the session today. We're so excited to have Brett with us. You know, when we were talking about how to choose a web development company, this is so important for every business, right? Needs a website these days, and selecting the right partner to help you really showcase what it is you're going to be delivering to that audience is so important. And I've heard some horror stories about businesses that have lost time, they have lost money because they invested in the wrong partner, and it led to missed deadlines and, limited scalability. Yeah, they were stuck with something that just couldn't grow or really, flow with them as their business grew. And of course, there's always that, security risk that is on a lot of people's minds these days that is another thing that can go wrong. So we are so glad that you're here to lend your expertise to us today, Brett.
Happy
Maybe
to be
before
here.
we get started, you just give us like 2 sentence or 3 sentence overview of you and your organization there at Dialogue.
Certainly. So Dialogues has been in the web development business for 29 years. We'll be 30 years old in March. So we've been around the block. We understand quite a bit about how it can be done, and we have a pretty strong belief that we know how it should be done. But happy to help in today's conversation.
Great. Awesome. So, Brett, let's just dive right in. We'd
Sure.
love to hear your thoughts on tip number 1 for businesses.
I think the most important thing for anyone selecting a web developer is to understand what you want out of your web initiative. It may be a brand new website because you're a new business, but frequently it's redesigning or redeploying a website because you're an established business and this isn't your first website. And key to understanding what you want is understanding what your goals are for the website. It's not uncommon for someone to come to us and say that they want a new website. When we ask what the goals are for the website, for them to be unclear on their goals. They just were told by management, we need a new website. So I think the most important thing that anyone can do before they begin to select a vendor is to understand, are you looking to improve your branding? Are you looking for lead generation? Are you trying to incorporate some other features beyond just marketing content on your website, perhaps a portal for your clients or e-commerce? Understanding what the goals are and being able to clearly articulate those goals in a scope is critical to success of any project. It's also critical for to share those goals with vendors that you are discussing as potential candidates for selection. Um, Additionally to the goals, it's important that you understand and have a clear expectation for the budget. Now, you may not want to share the budget when you're in the process of selecting a vendor. You may not want to share that budget with the vendor. I would suggest to you, you're better off by sharing your expectation for budget right at the very beginning. In
Mhm.
my experience, professional web development shops aren't trying to get as much money as they can get from you. They are trying to deliver the best product they can within the budget that you've established. So whether you keep it to yourself or whether you share it, understanding what your budget is going in, and frequently, again, we have folks come to us that don't really know what to expect in terms of budget. And there's a wide range of um, uh, methods of creating a website. Some are more expensive, some are less expensive. So understanding your budget is important going into the process. You also need to understand your timeline and you need to be realistic about a timeline. Frequently, when people come to us, Um, they are trying to meet a deadline because of perhaps a trade show that's coming up, or also fairly frequent is, well, we need it up by the first of the year. Um, Understanding what that is and understanding whether your timeline is realistic has a big impact on the success of the project. So understanding your timeline, your budget, and your goals. With that information, you can be prepared to create a scope, what you
Mhm.
want to ask a vendor to provide to you. Um, so among the items that you need to think about in scope is design. If you are a large business, then branding is crucially important. And you may be bringing design uh, expertise to the table for the web developers. It's not uncommon for us to work with um, our larger clients. They have a marketing and creative department, or perhaps agency, and they will be creating the design. We're simply implementing the development of the website and all the functionality that goes with it. But understanding what you expect from that, and if you need the vendor to provide design, what level of design you need is important. Obviously, features and functions of the website need to be clearly stated in your scope. But one thing that often gets left out, Christina, is a definition of the expectations for the life cycle of this web project.
Mm.
Oftentimes, people are so excited about launching a new website, they fail to consider, okay, how long is this going to live? If this is a major investment for you because you're spending a significant amount of your marketing budget this year for a new web design, then
Right.
you probably expect it to live a fair number of years. And that's important to articulate that and understand that when you're selecting a vendor, because it's relatively simple for smaller shops to put together a very quick WordPress website. But if your expectation is that you're going to add new functionality and features over time, but you haven't articulated that to the vendor, then they may not be building it in such a way that makes it easy for it to grow the way that you need it to grow. Um,
That's
so
interesting, Brett, because
yeah,
I've run across that in the past where um, someone has had a vendor create this website, but then they've been reliant on them to continue with the updates because they could not figure out, or they didn't know HTML to be able to go in there and make the changes. And it was just not discussed ahead of time that that they were wanting to go in and make changes throughout the course of the year, and do their own little updates. So that's a very important part of it.
Deb, you're absolutely right. I mean, one of the greatest gotchas is um, it goes without saying that we need to be able to maintain our content. No, it really needs to be said that you have the expectation
Yeah.
that you're going to have non-skilled individuals maintaining content. And absolutely, most web development shops can provide for that level of easy to use content maintenance. But if it isn't specified going in, they may or may not accommodate for it without some kind of a change order or additional stress down the road. We encourage in the projects we're involved, we want our clients to be able to be as self-sufficient as they possibly can be. And we typically have discussions about that. If they don't bring it up, we tend to. But it's something that you don't want to overlook, which is kind of a not so an actionable item out of this whole concept of understanding what you want is a proper project scope that you can
Yeah.
present to a vendor, so that if you're going to be interviewing multiple vendors, and you should, you're providing the same scope to each vendor, so you can anticipate responses back from those vendors to be more aligned and fairly comparable. Um, so that's a nice segue into what I think is another big tip, Christina, and that is understanding what you can do in this project.
Mhm.
Um, it's not like buying a new sofa. You're going to be involved. Most web development projects span weeks or sometimes months or more, depending upon the complexity. And you need to be prepared for what your involvement is going to be with the vendor, which includes things like understanding that for a successful project, you really need to be prepared to have all stakeholders involved in the discussion. That doesn't mean that all stakeholders have to be in every single meeting, but they do need to be involved, because frequently we find that if you don't involve all stakeholders, then they may have some expectations that don't get revealed until the final approval cycle, and then you're left having to go back and accommodate for expectations that never got voiced. So understanding who are the stakeholders, who do we need, internally, who does your organization need to sign off, and what needs need to be accommodated before you get started, and will they have availability to participate? Um, the frequency of meetings during a web development project varies greatly, and most vendors can accommodate any frequency of meeting schedules. But understanding that going in, and having conversations with yourselves internally about who can participate is, I think, very important. The other interesting aspect of that is for more complex projects, and oftentimes we will build applications that live behind the website veneer and provide functionality, as we discussed earlier. Portals come to mind, very easy thing to understand, where your clients may be coming to the portal and gaining access to their previous invoices and so forth, or perhaps there's other functionality that exists. We do document management, for example, for certain clients, where they're sharing documents back and forth with their clients. Understanding whether or not you are qualified and have the internal resources to properly define the scope is important to understand as well. You may need some assistance from a vendor to help you define what you want, because it may be
Yeah.
there may be elements to it that are beyond your ability to either fully understand or fully articulate. Um, and many vendors will work with you in a limited discovery phase to just help you define what it is you want. And the result of that type of an engagement is a properly defined scope that you could then take and shop with other vendors. We do that as an example. Um, and then there are the perfunctory things that you need to be prepared to bring to the vendor to help them understand how they can build a website that's going to meet your requirements. Do you have a style guide, for example? And being prepared to provide that early in the project, ideally, is along with your scope document, so that they understand, is a national brand that's going to require very meticulous styling, custom development, or is this a smaller business that has a very modest budget, where perhaps a properly customized template is a better suit for the budget and perfectly acceptable in terms of brand requirements? They also, it's really important to, if you're trying to stay within a limited budget, to understand what in-house resources can you bring to the project that can trim down the scope from the vendor. If you have copywriting capabilities in-house, if you have some design capabilities in-house, editing, mere content entry. There are some websites that have a large amount of content, and if you're going to pay an external vendor to populate that content, to create and curate that content, you may be able to save some money if you have available resources in-house that can do some of that content preparation and deployment in-house. But you need to be very realistic about the
Yeah.
availability of these resources. Just because you have those resources in-house doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be available to meet the timeline of your project. So
Yeah.
understanding what you can do is very important. And it also, if you already have certain vendors, if you have a marketing or advertising agency that you want to be involved in the process, identify that right up front, um, so that the vendor understands, okay, we're going to be coordinating with an outside agency who's going to be responsible for what, and that needs to be clearly articulated as well.
I think as I was, I've worked with a few people who have been exploring web development and where they go with it. And just in talking through them through the process, as they've considered, should we do this? Should we input the content? A lot of the times it's like, should we write the content? And I always say, you can, but you will be the one holding the project up. I would put money on it. Like it's like people could think they can sit down and write stuff, but based on the way you work, if you're an owner or whatever, stepping aside to do that is just it's not impossible, but it is very challenging. So I remember for the longest time I'd be like, okay, but just so you know, you will be the one doubling the time of this project. So
even with the greatest intentions, Christina, you're absolutely right. We don't go outside to
Mm-hmm.
vendors to help us with web development. We do that ourselves, but we
Mm-hmm.
do use external vendors for
Yeah.
social media marketing and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
And we have often been the bottleneck in that process. So I know, I can speak from experience, that it's very, very hard to divest yourself from your job responsibilities, your
Yeah.
day-to-day job responsibilities, to be an active participant in a web development
Mm-hmm.
effort. So
Oh.
an actionable item out of the tip to understand what you can do is to go back and um, redefine your scope, including what you intend to contribute. And
Mm-hmm.
part of that is as well is setting expectations for the frequency of meetings. Some folks would rather just have infrequent meetings, hand it off, and want to be pleasantly surprised that it's exactly what they want at the end of the project. And that may work in some situations. What we tend to find is the more intimate communication throughout the project, the more successful the project can be, particularly for those that are of larger scope.
Okay. I have one sort of general question in this area. Do you find that, um, like some people seem like they want to do things in phases or increments? Do you find that to be sort of a bad thing in general, or does it just depend on the situation? Or
No, I think it's a very good strategy, especially for projects of a larger size, right?
mm-hmm.
I mean, if you can break it down into more manageable chunks. Let's say, for example, that you do have a trade show that's coming up in 3 months, and you want to make
Mm-hmm.
sure that key information is available to supplement your efforts at the trade show. Maybe you make that the first phase, knowing that there's additional work that needs to be done that isn't necessarily required before the deadline of a trade show. So
Right.
phase development, I think, makes an awful lot of sense. There's another place, Christina, where phase development makes perfect sense, and we would recommend it. And that is if you are building a system, your website needs to, for example, we on a recent project, we've worked with a, a child care organization up in Pennsylvania. It's a nonprofit. They manage 36 child care centers, and the project involved replacing an aging in-house access database with a
Mm-hmm.
web-based mechanism that allowed them to keep up with the tuition billing for each one of their child care kiddos every week, and to be able to automate the process and digitize the process of tuition agreements, which have traditionally been done literally on a piece of paper, and then they get emailed to the central office where they get printed and put in a folder. And they wanted to automate that. Um, and in a process like that, being able to phase in the most important pieces first
Mm-hmm.
helps everyone understand, okay, that worked because now we're really moving a lot of people's cheese, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because they've
Mm-hmm.
been doing things in a paper and pen way, and
Yeah.
now we're asking them to do it in a digital way. And many of these people are not as comfortable in sitting in front of a computer because their day-to-day job responsibilities are taking care of children. So
Yeah.
phasing in functionality over time can be very beneficial to ease adoption if you're trying to introduce a new paradigm to a population that's never used it before.
Makes sense. Cool. Okay. Ooh, this is a lot. This is good. So, what about tip number 3? What have you got for us?
Well, tip number 3 kind of obviously follows tips 1 and 2, and that is you need to understand what you trust the vendor can do for you, and that is probably where people tend to start. I just think you have to start by understanding what you want, your goals, and
Mm-hmm.
what you can do before you start looking at what are the criteria in a vendor that are important to you. And I use the word trust because I think that's really important. And um, most of us, especially if it's something that we don't understand how to do ourselves, when we're picking support from an attorney or a doctor or an accountant. These are areas where I don't have personal expertise. So I certainly want to be able to trust the individual that I'm bringing in to give me legal advice or medical advice. So understanding what you trust the vendor can do for you, and how can you evaluate trust in the vendor. Obviously, any interactive communication you have with the vendor helps establish whether or not you feel like they can do what they present that they can do. in their email communications, in any kind of Zoom or telephone communications that you have, any face-to-face communications. It's important to understand if all things are equal and you're looking at two vendors that present a similar proposal for solving the problem and budget is acceptable in either case, it really is important to understand who do you trust and who will work well with your organization
Mm-hmm.
in the project. One of the things that we do when we have a new project coming on and we build the team, we designate the team that's going to work the project. We take very careful attention to make sure that we're pairing up personalities of our staff that will work well with the personalities of the stakeholders with our client.
Yeah.
Um, not all people interact the same way. We have certain clients that really want everything to be curt and quick. Don't waste time with the details. Just give me the facts quickly so that I can get on. And
Mm-hmm.
we wouldn't put a more loquacious developer on that project because they would drive them crazy, right? So you need to get a feel for whether or not the process is going to be excruciating or going to be pleasant. It doesn't have to be fun because for most people, building a website is stressful and a distraction from what their day-to-day duties might be. But it certainly needs to at least be pleasant. So understanding that going in is important. And then there's the table stakes that are important. Does the vendor understand, to your point, Deb, the security requirements that you have? Are you going to be, if it's a marketing website, obviously security is always important, and we want to make sure that your website doesn't go down because it's hacked, and that's an embarrassment. But it's not quite the same concern for security than if you're going to be building an application that manages sensitive data. Back to the child care centers project, for example, we have information about small children in the database, right? So properly securing that is a crucial concern, obviously. And does the vendor understand how to properly protect that? If you are not technical, then again, you may want to seek some outside guidance to understand, is this vendor going to be able to manage this properly? Or at least have candid conversations with the vendor about how they're going to do it. And does it meet your satisfaction for security concerns? Everyone should be concerned about security. When Deb, you and I were talking before we got started about the fact that we've been doing this for 30 years, and it used to be many years ago, security was always important, but it was not as big of a distraction as it is today.
Yeah.
Provisions for security can eat up a very significant amount of the budget today because every website is a potential target. And
Yeah.
I can't underscore how important security and understanding what your vendor is going to do to secure the project is. Other things that you need to look at, of course, you want to review the portfolio. Does the work that they have done in the past reflect the type of work that you would like done for you? That's table stakes, right? So you presumably before you get to the final selection criteria, you've evaluated the portfolio, and you also want to understand how will they actually technically build it. Now, you may not
Mm-hmm.
be a web developer and understand what different tools are out there, but you should certainly ask and understand. Some web tools can result in very attractive and beautiful websites, but they may lock you into a particular hosting environment or a particular code set that may not be readily available. There may be a day when you're no longer working with this vendor. Will your website die because that vendor is not available? That would be a criteria that you need to at least understand going in.
Mm-hmm.
Are you being tied to some kind of proprietary hosting environment or very specialized one? Either way, that might constrain your flexibility in making a different selection moving forward. Those are important criteria. Um, I think another thing that's very important as well is, will you have access to the actual developers doing the work, or will your week to week communication always be solely with a project manager that is not a developer? That can be a problem, but again, particularly for the
Yeah.
more complex projects, right? So and there's nothing wrong with outsourcing. I know a lot of web development shops will outsource to keep their costs down. But if that outsourcing overseas means that they can't put developers in the calls with you so that you can have direct communication, importantly, so that the developers can hear directly what the concerns are, then you run a risk of losing information through that project manager as they communicate the requirements
Yeah.
and changes to the developers. So I think it's truly important that you have direct access to developers. And back to my earlier point, you can get along with those developers when you're talking with them. Um, so the yeah, and then I think it is always important, and I absolutely applaud young developers that are new to the business that are getting involved, and in fact, I am one of uh, I'm the second oldest developer on our staff. Charlie's a little bit older than I am, but I've got white beard, and I know that for us to be competitive as a company, we can't be reliant upon what I learned how to do 20 or 30 years ago. We have much younger developers on our staff, and I'm delighted to see young developers get started and offer their opportunity to provide services. But again, the more significant the investment is to you,
Yeah.
the more important it is to understand longevity of the vendor that you're working with. Will they
Hmm.
be here for you in 2 years or 5 years? And while you may not be able to predict that accurately in any case, you certainly have a better indication that they're going to be here if they have already been here for some time. They're a
Yeah.
stable business. They're going to be around to help you. Um, and references, if it's a large project, if it's a significant budget for you, then take the time to ask them to provide references. Um,
Hmm.
Talk with people that have built projects with them before. And honestly, they're going to give you they're certainly going to cherry pick who they offer to you to talk with. But if they have had successful projects with other people that you can communicate with, and that can allay any concerns that they are going to be a good
Yeah.
vendor for your project.
And you learn how they got, there's always something that happened that was unexpected or something often. So you can learn a lot even from a great experience. You'll learn some tips and tricks, I think.
I think you're absolutely right, and I think the reality is there are all sorts of opportunities for projects to take longer than expected. Frequently, it is because um, clients can't turn around approvals as quickly as they want to, or if they are contributing content, it's really challenging for them to keep up with the timeline to
Yeah.
deliver that content. There are other reasons why the vendor may have imposed delays because the project may end up being more complex than they anticipated.
Hmm.
And frequently, that can be alleviated with a more accurate scope at the onset. So the more vague the scope, the more risk you are introducing to a project in terms of meeting budget and timeline, right? How does the vendor manage um, non-scope items? Some vendors offer a fixed price, but at some point they're going to decide this is we're going to have to charge you some change order charges because this is beyond the scope that we originally negotiated. Other vendors may manage that differently, but understanding what happens when you inevitably, and this typically happens because as careful as you can be in creating a scope, when you see the website coming to life, it's going to spark new ideas that you didn't consider.
Mhm.
And you realize, wow, I see how awesome that component of the website is. Do you think we could revamp this other area of the website we didn't think was important? Well, the
Yeah.
answer is always sure, but how will you and the vendor negotiate what that additional cost
Hmm.
might be, right?
Yeah.
Um, so understanding that, and what I would suggest is from the standpoint of um, refining your vendor selection down to a final list of maybe the top three candidates, what I find is a valuable tool is just a grid on a spreadsheet, with the elements that are important to you about vendor selection, security, um, um, uh, longevity, whatever those criteria are, and then against the other axis, the vendors that are in the criteria, and just build out that matrix so you can understand how they stack up against one another. Um, at the end of the day, if two vendors look like they can provide the product for you, and you feel comfortable that the budget that they've established for you or the proposal they provided works for you financially, then again, I think it's important to pick a vendor that you feel like you can get along with, because it has been our experience that even projects that were envisioned by the client to be, well, we just need to get this website up and we'll never ask anything from you again. We have clients that have been with us for decades, literal decades, and it's a relationship that is ongoing. And where there's a good chemistry between the client and our representatives on our staff, that helps facilitate a long term partnership. And what you're really looking for, I would advise, is what you're really looking for is a partner, someone that will take the time to understand, how do I translate your goals? And the reason why the goals are so important and why you need to articulate the goals as well as the scope you build around those goals, is because a very good vendor may offer recommendations for how you can meet the goals with a slightly altered scope that could save
Mm-hmm.
you time or costs.
Yeah.
Because remember, the vendor has more experience with this than you probably do. So
Mm-hmm.
getting them to understand what your goals are may help influence and adjust the scope in an acceptable way that benefits you. And a good partner is looking for that, looking for ways that they can help you make the very best out of their contribution as an outsourcer to your company. They're looking for ways to help you add value to the proposition.
Awesome. Good stuff. Is your mind blown, Deb? I can see you thinking.
So many things are running through my mind right now. This has been great, Brett, and I know that there's value, lots of value in this content that our listeners are going to enjoy. Maybe even going back through it again,
Mm-hmm.
through the podcast over and over, because you do bring up so many important points to setting yourself up for success from the get go and looking at it as a long term relationship. And, it's going to be a living and breathing thing, that is going to need attention and nurturing and, looking at how is it going to grow, kind of like a baby. You're starting with it at one stage, but you're hoping that it's
That's right.
going to advance to, where your organization is going to go as you
Mm-hmm.
grow. So important.
Yeah,
Awesome.
Yeah.
I like that description, Deb. I think that even if you really don't believe that you need a long term partner, I think it's good that you are picking a vendor that could be a long term partner, because you may be wrong.
Mm-hmm. I like
You know,
that.
this short term little small thing may grow once, once other people in your organization see what you did here. They may get excited and want to get involved. And if you picked a vendor that you don't really feel like is going to be a good long term partner, but maybe their price was a little bit less expensive, then
Right.
you may have kind of shot yourself in the foot. So I think that's important to look at it from that perspective.
I like it. And maybe the vendor can watch them during the teenage years.
Well,
How about the terrible twos first?
That
Okay.
too. All right, I'm gonna wind this up. So we'll post some links in the chat on LinkedIn in case anybody needs to reference anything. But thank you so much, Brett. Appreciate you sharing the wisdom and joining us. Deb, always good to see you. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. I hope you join us next time for Ready, Set, Action. It's Deborah Horowitz and Christina Whitmer. So you can follow us on LinkedIn, YouTube. We're also on Spotify, and we hope to see you next week.